Om Jnanatimirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamsha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratushe Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasati Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Okay, I hope everyone's staying safe. We've had a few, I think there'll be, yeah, I know that a lot of us have had our paths disrupted by the Omicron wave. So yeah, hopefully you're all safe and well. And if you're unsafe, or if you're unwell, hopefully you're safe at least. Maybe praying for wellness is a bit too ambitious. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen. Let me know if you can see it. So I'm going to share directly onto the Gita. But before we go ahead with this third chapter, I thought because we had that tremendous break, and I'm hoping we have a weekend separating the Christmas Christmas and New Year's this coming year, so that we don't have to have like a 3-week break again. Because we had a big break, I feel like most of us would be a little bit rusty on the flow of the Gita, or at least the content is a little far back in our heads. Before we touch on that fully, how's everyone going for the second assessment question? Is everyone feeling on top of it a little bit? Because it does touch on some things that we haven't gone through in the classes yet, although you definitely would have done in your readings. Is everyone feeling confident with it, or how's everyone feeling with it? Yeah.
It's just a time factor, Prabhuji, just trying to get on top of it. It's just a time factor, really. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, as I said, I'm not going to be too harsh, especially this time around with the second question, even, because I think pretty much everyone in the group has had something disrupted, if it is with public holiday stuff or with Corona or something. So just because it's difficult times we're in, I'm not going to be too stressed on people getting it in like a few days later. So that's just why I was checking in how everyone's going. But normally I am pretty strict, but I understand these are, maybe it's out of a lot of people's control, right? So I'm going to be a bit lenient with that. Okay. Yes. I'm not sure. Is it Katyayani Mataji or is it Srinivas Prabhu?
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
Prabhu is in India.
Oh, Jai.
He's unable to attend, but I am also in Queensland, but I will attend the class today, Prabhu.
Okay, no problem. Jai. Yes, I like your Prabhu, Śrikānta. Oh yes, let's all have a congratulations for Śrikānta Sena Prabhu, who was initiated during our long break. So let's have one loud muted Haribol for Prabhu. Just muted as I have headphones in. I don't want to go through that. Jai, Haribol. Okay. Big congratulations to Prabhu. Okay, so with all that, let's now begin our discussion. So today, just before we get really into it, I'm gonna start off with a group activity. If we can we're all gonna break into groups, and I just want each group to sort of map out the Bhagavad-gītā up until this point. I just thought, as I was getting ready last night, I thought, look, everyone's gonna be at the least a tiny bit rusty, because we've been following through the Bhagavad-gītā in terms of its flow and everything. And I really think if you don't have the flow of the initial chapters, you're really going to be a little bit lost as we go along. I think the Gita makes sense as a flowing text, not just purport by purport, if that makes sense. So in order to get that flow again, I'm going to break everyone up into, I think, around maybe 3 groups, maybe 4 groups. I might do it. I'll see when I have the total number up. And in each group, I'd just like you all to flow chart out the flow of the Bhagavad-gītā up until this point. I'll give you 10 minutes. So the question might be, how much detail should we go into? Please don't do just chapter 1 says this, then chapter 2 says that, right? That might be a little too little detail, but you don't need to do verse by verse flow either, because it is only 10 minutes, right? I'll give 10 minutes to write it up, and then 5 more to then show everyone, right? So maybe go in more detail than just chapter by chapter, but no need to go in verse by verse. I'll leave it to you to figure out how precisely you want to get into. Just realize that you have 10 minutes to draw it up. So the activity is to draw a flowchart in your group of the flow of the Bhagavad-gītā up until this point, right? I'm only giving 10 minutes because we have it blocked out, but show how those blocks relate to each other, right? We're going to have, just to give you an idea, Arjuna's going to be, first we see Arjuna, he sees the armies, right? And then he has these arguments. And then Krishna responds with this, but then that results in this, like that, right? How we've been drawing out the general flow of the Gita already in our discussions. Hopefully that won't be too difficult. Hopefully we haven't all forgotten too much. Hopefully we still remember who Krishna is, at least, maybe a little bit more. So we'll break out into groups then, and then, I hope that's clear for everyone. Please let me know if it's not. How many people are in the call? 16. Yeah, let's do 3 groups. No, let's do 4 groups. Okay. Just give me half a second. I'm about to open up the groups. Okay, I'm going to open up the rooms. I hope it all makes sense. I'll see you in around 10 minutes. And good luck. Hare Krishna. Okay, feel free. I'm pretty sure I've set it so that you guys can share your screens. If everyone can just share the general flow, just so that we can have our, all participants. Yeah. So you have sharing privileges if you want to share. Okay, yeah. Do you want to screen share that one, Mrugank, and just run us through it? I just want everyone to really have their memory jogged. Yeah. Jai. I'm not sure if I can't say if it's right or wrong because I have no idea what's going on. Mrugank, I think you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. First of all, it's not very logically written down because it's sort of all over the place.
That's all right. I was just joking.
But yeah, chapter 1, we got 1 to 21. They're just observing the armies and blowing conchs and stuff. 21 to 47, then Arjuna starts to speak and say, "Take me to the middle of the battlefield." And he sees his family and laments and gives reasons to not fight. In chapter 2, the first part, Arjuna continues lamenting and he surrenders to Krishna. And then 11 to 30. We hear about the qualities of the soul, which is considered jnana yoga. And then 31 to 37, there's sort of other reasons to fight. As Abhishek Prabhu says, if you want to convince someone to become a brahmachari, you tell them you get 3 hot meals a day, which is not really why you join the ashram, but it's kind of like that. And then 38 to 48, we said karma yoga. 49 to 53 was bhakti yoga, and 54 to 72 was symptoms of the perfected yoga. And then chapter 3, the first 9 verses were about the need for prescribed duties. 10 to 16 was about the benefits of yajna and the purpose of doing the prescribed duties. And then 17 to 30 was, well, we said 2 things, either duties to set perform duty in order to set an example, or when can duties be given up, prescribed duties be given up. And then 31 to 35 was obstacles to prescribed duties, and that's all we had heard, so we stopped there. I know the chapter goes into 42 verses or something, but we did the last set.
That's all right. I just wanted till text 16, so going up all the way up to 35 is already cherry on top. So yeah, very good. And yeah, as Mrugank pointed out there, you can sort of interpret the flow of the categories slightly differently. Again, like any category name is one interpretation, and it's not that every interpretation is valid, but there are many valid interpretations for the flow. Okay, then who else's group? Who was the scribe for another group?
I can share, Prabhu.
Yes, please.
Prabhu, it's again handwriting. Maybe I can read sometimes.
Oh no, that's all right. That's right. I was actually considered a special needs student, and in my high school, because my handwriting was so bad, the government actually recognized my handwriting as a handicap. So yeah, that's right. I can't judge anyone.
Bro, can you read? Can you see the screen?
Yes, yes.
Okay, basically it starts with Arjuna's Vishad, where he basically says, take it to the middle of the army. And he basically had 4 key reasons why he was in that state. One was he was thinking he will get sinful reaction. He will not have any enjoyment. Like if he kill them, then what is the benefit? Like he can't share that he has won a war with anyone. Or destruction of family tradition and compassion were another reason. And then following that, he basically became he became indecisive and very confused. And then he took shelter of Krishna. He accepted him as a guru. And basically Krishna started with chastising Arjuna straight away that you're acting too intelligent. Krishna starts with basically Gyan Sankhya philosophy, which basically is that we are not the body and soul is eternal, and hence there is no need to lament or mourn. And then it moves to the Sakam Karma, where going to that just why not you just do your duties and get the benefits? That's another reason to do your duties, to go to the war. And from there the focus shifted to Nishkam Karma. It's basically the benefits of working in the Buddhi Yoga. Work but stay detached. And also there was a section on how do you practice that. There was a section where you can't be multi-branched, must be single focused. And other message was that knowing Veda is not sufficient, like you need to know the purpose of the Veda. And the last part of chapter 2 was Sthit Pragya, where it talked about symptoms, how does he speak, how does he sit, and how does he walk. Which is who's that perfect guy who's situated and controlling his senses. Then Arjuna again got confused. He basically said, is Buddhi Yoga better or Sakam Karma better? Like if Buddhi Yoga is better, then why he's asking him to do this dirty war? And Krishna basically started by saying that realization, there are 2 paths. One is Gyan, 2 type of people. One is Gyan Yoga and another is Bhakti Yoga, like path. And the rest of the chapter 3 was about like importance of doing prescribed duties. Another part was that you will do your duties anyways as per your sanskars or as per your guna and nature. And 3 to 9 was basically Nishkam Karma, and we didn't finish the last part, which is the cycle of sacrifice. We were still discussing, but it is the conclusion is all work done must be to please Vishnu.
Yes, and that's all right with the cycle of sacrifice, because I feel like that's relatively fresh. Just one thing quickly, all of it was good. Just one thing I want to clarify, because it really ties into today's discussion. If you go into the previous page, not to nitpick, I don't want to make everyone scared, but with this point here of realization, Gyan, and then Bhakti Yoga, more so the question beginning it is Arjuna is saying, you're talking about renunciation, gyan, and then you're also talking about karma, doing. You're talking about renunciation and doing. Why are you telling me to do both? And then Krishna's response is, actually, there aren't two paths of action and renunciation. Action is done so that one may be renounced. So when he's speaking about the two, he's saying there are two, what's the word he uses? Nishtha, right? There are two situations. One is either situated at a level where they have to do work in order to be purified to become renounced, or they're on the platform of renouncing. So the structure is good. That was just one thing, which is fine. I'm happy that you even remembered that structure. I wasn't expecting people to, but that's just a slight thing that that we just need to adjust, so that we know. Yeah. So Krishna, he's saying, oh, Arjuna, you think there's two ways, right? And that's why you're confused. But I'm not telling you, you can either, that renunciation is better, but there's also karma and there's all these different ways, right? What I'm saying is that there's different levels of qualification. Again, it's the point that if somebody says that the Bhagavad-gītā doesn't have the karma ladder, the yoga ladder, and we're just reading it into it, they'd have to try and really heavily explain Krishna's words, right? Because Krishna here, he's saying there is a yoga ladder, right? There are different platforms, and so I'm speaking to the different platforms. Yeah, that's all. But besides that, that's really, really good. Got the flow down well. Yes, Prabhu? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, and I think then what was the next group? I think it was Alex, Shri, yeah, Shri's unmuted.
Yeah, I'm happy to share screen, and then within Mataji you can talk.
Okay, for sure.
Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So we started with chapter 1. We just skimmed through the notes, and we don't have the verses in front of it, but the flow of the class that we've had. So the first one was Visad Yoga, which is the yoga of lamentation. So we are observing the armies. There were signs of victories which were defined that by Pandavas were already destined to be victorious. There were the various signs, like the chariot was from the sun god, goddess of fortune was on the side of Arjuna, on Pandavas, etc. Then there were defined qualities of pure devotee that make him fit for receiving transcendental knowledge. So those qualities were defined. In Arjuna's mind, how doubt and reasons not to fight started off. So basically, because he was compassionate, he said he was very compassionate towards family. He didn't want to kill them. He said there'll be no enjoyment if nobody's left. Then he was fearful of sinful reaction, that I'm killing Kshatriyas and Brahmins, so there will be sinful reaction towards me. And then he's very worried that it will lead to destruction of family tradition. Then Arjun is basing his reason of not fighting on Dharma-shastra. But Krishna keeps revealing that Gyan is higher than Dharma-shastra, so knowledge of reality and spiritual truth. These are two different things. So Arjun is basing his reasoning on Dharma, whereas Krishna is trying to give him the spiritual truth. That's when Arjun finally, he's very confused and he surrenders to Krishna as a disciple. So that's a message to us also, that if we want to get the message from Krishna on what the Gyan is and what Gita is, then we have to be in a submissive mode and we have to learn it as a disciple. Then there's the analogy of the sun also, which was given, that just like, so there are three, just a second. So there are three phases, how we identify the sun. So there are three components, basically Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagwan. Similarly, the analogy of the sun is the light of the sun is Brahman, the planet sun is the Paramatma, and the sun god is actually Krishna. Qualities of the soul were also defined. Yeah, so Krishna is giving him knowledge of the soul, whereas Arjun lacks Vigyan. So he lacks the realization, and therefore he's not able to understand the knowledge of the soul. Then Krishna is trying to justify to Arjuna and saying that even if you fight, if you will either ways, if you die, you will go to heavenly planets, or if you win, then you will enjoy on the earth. So either way is a win-win situation for you. Then we describe the yoga ladder, where it tells us how we can rise in our bhakti. So while we may start with karma yoga, but then there is sakam yoga and there's nishkam yoga. So sakam yoga, we do karma yoga, where there is we are always expecting something in return, whereas nishkam is where the element of detachment starts off. And the moment you reach a point where you're doing everything for Krishna, for the love of Krishna, for offering him to Krishna, that becomes bhakti. From nishkam yoga, karma yoga, it turns into bhakti then. We even talked about prescribed duties in one of the class, where it said that what are the various conduct, how we need to conduct ourselves. And then that's it.
Jai, that is it. Haribol, very nice. Thank you. Okay, very good. And then now let's have the final one. And then, yeah, depending how long that goes, we might just have our break immediately after that. And then we'll have 1 hour of non-stop me lecturing you all. So,
yeah, I'll share my screen. Sorry.
Jai, Divya.
I did it. I hand wrote it, so I put it in. I scanned it.
That's right. That's all right.
All good.
Oh, how did you scan it?
Oh, just from my phone.
Oh, Haribol, I love it.
Yeah, just quick and easy. And my flow chart doesn't really make sense, so like it's just all over the place.
That's
so
right.
Sorry for that.
It won't be the first one to not make sense, so that's all right.
If somebody, I don't know, like Uma Mataji, I think was it, that said that she wanted to explain with me. I'll just start off, I guess. So the first chapter, we see that very first chapter, yeah, we see that Dhritarashtra's questions to Sanjaya, asking what is the situation in the battlefield. So he wants to know like if his sons are ready to fight, or how are the Pandavas, like are they shaking or whatnot. And so yeah, after that it shows, like I think we move on to the significance of Kurukshetra, where that is discussed as well, how the battlefield itself is a place, a holy place where the battle is being fought. And then we see Arjuna observing the battlefield, and we see that he's confused and he doesn't want to fight because he sees, and no, sorry. First they blow the conch shells, and then Arjuna is confused. He's shaken. He's to see that all these men that I'm fighting against, they're all my relatives. Like, if I kill them here and now, then how will I be happy in future? Like, who will I share my happiness with? And yeah, so and with the blowing of conch shells, we also see the signs of victory because of the loud roar of Arjuna's conch shell, or you can see the fear in the Kauravas when they blow their conch shells as well. And so we move on to Arjuna deciding not to fight because he has compassion for his enemy. And we see that Krishna explains in this chapter, in the first chapter as well, that the bodies, I think it's the first chapter. Wait, I think that's the second chapter. Sorry, that's the second chapter. That the body, sorry.
That's right.
The body's different to the soul. Yeah,
it's fine if the chapters bleed into each other, because I just want the general flow. So don't worry too much if you're mixing chapters around, because the chapters do bounce around from each other a bit. So yeah. Don't stress.
So yeah, sorry. Yeah, so Krishna is just explaining the yoga ladder as well in the second chapter, and duties of different people. So the varnashrama. And I think we move on to the next page. Yeah, you guys can see this? Yeah, all right. So yeah, so Krishna's teachings from the second chapter, we can also see in Bhagavad-gītā 2.31 that the body cannot be, sorry, the soul cannot, sorry, that's written, that's meant to be soul. So the soul cannot be slain. Yeah, ignore that. Yeah. And then there's 8 stages of fall down. Krishna also discusses. And very important, he says about Jnana Yoga, so the knowledge of the body and soul, Shakama Yoga, Shakama Karma, performing duties for enjoyment, and Nishkami Karma, which is detachment from work without reactions. And in chapter 3, Krishna discusses, in chapter 3, we see in the first part that Arjuna is confused and he doesn't know if he should renounce or perform action. And then Krishna explains that he is a Kshatriya, so he should not renounce, but rather perform his duty and fight. And not sure where this one ties in. I think Mataji was discussing that Vedas.
Third chapter only, Prabhu, the Vedas thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
we
you,
ended this in the last class.
Yeah. So so we discussed that the first starting point is the Vedas and the Supreme Lord, so from which we get the knowledge, and from that we perform our prescribed duties, and from that we do yagya, which provides us with rain, and with the rain we get food grains, and with that food we offer it to Krishna. And yeah, so it just all goes back to Krishna. Like we get the knowledge from Krishna and we offer it back to Krishna. Like so we perform devotional service to Krishna. And I think Mataji just gave like a small example from that third chapter as well. 3.11, that watering the roots nourishes the whole plant. So therefore, worshipping Krishna satisfies all demigods. I think that's it.
Yeah, very
It's all
good.
over the place. Sorry,
it's
I'm
not
so
all
sorry.
over the place. I was expecting something chaotic, but it's actually pretty aesthetic. Like it flowed pretty well. So
Thank you.
Jai, very nice, very nice. Okay, I think it's 10:55. I think this is a natural point for us to take a break. Yeah, as I was telling the other groups, I think I told all of you at one point. I thought we can extend this as long as it takes, just because I do think, the rest of the discussion won't make any sense if we're too rusty, but I hope this has really refreshed at least the general flow up until this point. We'll have our 5-minute break, so I'll see you all at like, let's say 2 past 11. Yeah, I'll see you all on the other side. Let me know if you have any questions. Hari. Okay, you can all see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay, one second, let me turn the word for word on. No Devanagari, so just so that my screen's not too cluttered. I'm sorry for those of you who like to read the Devanagari more. Yes, advanced view, I'm an expert database user. If you stay back after class, I'll give you extra lessons on database mastery. Okay, so we've been doing chapter 3, and leading up until this moment, what has Krishna been arguing? Krishna has been saying, well, as we discussed a tiny bit when we overlooked one of the overviews, Krishna has been saying, well, I'm not actually confusing you. I'm speaking to 2 different levels. The first section we've discussed, the first half, text 3 to 16. This one really discusses the question of disqualification, right? So Krishna, he's explained, right? You're not qualified for it because of X, Y, Z. You're not qualified for renunciation. Qualify yourself first, right? It's no easy thing. So therefore, do Nishkama Karma Yoga and then enter into Jnana. Because again, let's not forget, even though these first 6 chapters are called the Karma Yoga section, Karma Yoga essentially just means Jnana Yoga. Karma Yoga is Jnana Yoga for those not qualified to fully do Jnana Yoga. Right. So actually, you could say that in the way that we break it down, it's Karma Yoga, then Bhakti Yoga, then Jnana Yoga. But in one sense, it's Jnana Yoga, then Bhakti Yoga, then Jnana Yoga, right? The first 6 chapters in their discussion of Karma Yoga are like indirect discussions of Jnana Yoga, right? And then, of course, the whole 18 chapters are all either indirect or direct descriptions of bhakti, right? They're indirect or direct glorifications of bhakti, right? So that's there also, undergirding the whole thing. So we found this first section is about that. But now the next few sections, and I'll just write this up here. So now for this section, which is texts 17 to 35, we're going to be discussing even if one is on this level of perfection of nishkama karma yoga, right? Even if one is, how to put it, he's received the fullness of it, right? He's passed that rung on the yoga ladder. Even then, he should still perform nishkama karma yoga in order to set the right example. So we'll call this nishkama karma yoga as preaching, right? So this section here is really establishing that. What Krishna is saying is he's saying, okay, maybe you are qualified for it, right? Our acharyas, they sort of describe that actually what was going through Krishna's mind is that Arjuna is sort of neither here nor there. What in the past time, obviously. In his actual constitutional position, Arjuna is a perfected devotee, right? But in the past time, he's not really a fully he's not really fully on the level of, well, I want to get some benefit, but he's not really fully renounced either. So Krishna, he's sort of presenting, actually, no matter which way you go, if you are on the level where you can act fully renounced, or if you're on the level where you're not fully renounced, either way, you should still perform this nishkama karma yoga. And we find this shift happens in text 17. However, he begins by describing the position of the fully satisfied person, right? The position of the person who was completely perfected, right? This path. And he does so by defining that person over texts 17 and 18. So maybe we can have Uma Mataji, would you be happy to read out the Sanskrit? If not, we can ask Jaswant Prabhu. Would you like to read out the Sanskrit? Oh,
yes, Prabhu. One
Jaya.
second.
Yeah.
So it's 17 and 18, right, Prabhu?
Yeah, I'm sharing it on the screen.
Oh.
Everyone can see it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yastvatma ratir yeva syad atma triptascha manava atmani eva cha santushtas tasya karyam navidyate.
Jai. But for one who takes pleasure in the self, whose human life is one of self-realization, and who is satisfied in the self only, fully satiated, for him there is no duty. Now I wanted you to read out the Sanskrit because specifically there is this term here, and this is the term which is really used to define, right, which we're using for our definition, atma ratir, right, atma ratihi, here, taking pleasure in the self. This is the term that's used. If it's not in the list of questions, I will add it to the list of questions. This is a good term to remember, right? So this is how he's defining it. In many ways, it's a cognate to these sthita pragya, right? So the atma ratihi, but it's slightly different. So the atma ratihi is one who's fully satisfied in the self. And what are they like? As we've said, right? Whose human life is one of self-realization. For him, there is no duty. Interesting, right? So now we're hearing a discussion of people who are not bound by questions of duty, right? Because they fully transcended them. Now let's do text 18, which continues this definition. I won't read out the Sanskrit. Well, I won't have you guys read out the Sanskrit. Naiva tasya krite nartho na krite neha kaschana na chasya sarva bhuteshu kaschidartha vyapashrayaha. Maybe we can have Mrugank Prabhu. Would you like to read out the English?
Yeah, a self-realized man has no purpose to fulfill in the discharge of his prescribed duties, nor has he any reason not to perform such work, nor has he any need to depend on any other living being.
Jai. So here we find a very high level of understanding. So this is the fullness, if you will, right? And these are all of the various symptoms, if you will, of somebody who is on the highest platform. And we can find there's almost a little bit of a different approach, right? Because we're hearing about a total transcendence to any duty. So then, what do we find? There's lots of things which he is exempt from doing. Who can tell me what are some of the symptoms that we've seen so far in this person, in these two texts, just to get an idea of who this individual is who's being described?
He's Atma Triptas, meaning that he's satisfied in the self.
Yeah, so he has
fully satiated.
Yeah, so we can turn that around because we're talking about things that he doesn't need to do, but we can say that he has no need or no taste, we can say, for things outside him, right? What's another thing that we can find listed about him? And this is why, even though I'm screen sharing, it's good to have your Gitas in front of you, right? So 17 to 18 will have the list of things. Who can find anything else? What are some other things that distinguish this person, maybe from the person who is not as advanced as him?
He doesn't have any benefit to be gained by doing prescribed duties?
Yes. So no benefit from prescribed duties. So it's not even that we could say, oh, well, he doesn't need to do them, but he could for something on the side, right? There is absolutely no gain that he can have from prescribed duties. What else can we find?
There's no impiety in him.
Sorry?
There's no impiety in him. It's all cleansed from the Krishna conscious process.
Yes, okay, yes. So there's no piety. Yeah. What else?
I'm just reading Prabhupada's verse. He says, all impiety within is instantly cleansed.
Yeah, and that makes sense, right? So he's got no piety, right? Because we'll think of piety is performing one's varnashram duties, right? Doing the right thing, right? This person, he's beyond that. He's not concerned about mundane religious expression. What else is there?
This person does not depend on any other living being.
Yes, very, very important. So he's got no dependence on any living beings, including the demigods, which is important, right? So that's why he doesn't need to do any of the sacrifices or any of the prayers or anything to any of the demigods. He doesn't need them, right? He has no dependence on them. He's fully self-situated. And I would say that's the main thing. There's only one thing left, and we've kind of discussed it, but it's I'll give you a few seconds to try and find it. Otherwise, because it's pretty obvious, it's probably the most obvious one, but we technically haven't said it yet. I think we've all
that he has got the grace of Krishna. That's why.
Yes, definitely he has the grace of Krishna, but what in relation to prescribed duties, there's one thing that we haven't discussed.
He has no obligations to perform.
Exactly, right? He has no obligations to perform prescribed duties. So all of these, they all tie into each other, right? And they all tie into a very basic principle that Krishna is going to outline as we go further throughout the texts, right? So he has no taste for things outside of him, right? Because he's fully self-satisfied. He doesn't perform any of this. He doesn't need to perform any of the prescribed duties, right? He has no, it's not that, remember how we were discussing, right? The prescribed duties, they cleanse the 5 various sins of all the various living entities killed throughout the day. He doesn't have any of that obligation, right? So none of these obligations are there. Furthermore, he doesn't get any benefit from them, right? Because he's in this fully transcendental position. So how could he benefit from something that is not inherently transcendental? He has no piety, right? Because piety is, again, a material thing. Piety is the best material thing, but it is still a material thing, right? this person is not engaging with such things, and he has no dependence on any living being, right? Again, because dependence is a material factor. So because of all of these reasons, because of all of these things, these are the unique features, if you will, of such a person, right? So Arjuna hears such a thing. And then we get to text 19. So whoops, mouse. So Krishna says, Tasmad asaktaha saktatam karyam karma samachara asakto hyacharan karma param apnoti purushaha. Right? Maybe we can have Divyansh. Would you like to read out the English?
Yeah, sure. Therefore, without being attached to the fruit of activities, one should act as a matter of duty, for by working without attachment, one attains the supreme. Right?
Yes, thank you. So Krishna then, now he's continuing on, right? So therefore, without being attached to the fruits of actions, one should act as a matter of duty. By working dutifully with detachment, one can attain liberation of the Supreme Lord. Here we find, again, we can find, again, what is the goal of karma, right? It's again to reach another point. I just want to stress this because everyone always gets confused. They think karma is one of the many ways. Karma is purely there just to receive another goal, another destination. So this explains the general nature of that. Now, what Arjuna is thinking now, after hearing this, he's thinking, is this actually possible to attain, right? Has anyone ever done this? Because as Śrikānta Sena Prabhu has written, this is a very high thing, right? This is very elevated. Has anyone actually realistically achieved this, right? And so wondering this, now we hear the example of Janaka Maharaj, right? So what do we hear? Karmanaiva hi samsiddhim astita janakadayaha lokasangrahamevapi sampashyan kartum arhasi. Maybe we can have Alex Prabhu. Would you like to read out the translation?
That text 20?
Yeah.
Yeah. Kings such as Janaka attain perfection solely by performance of prescribed duties. Therefore, just for the sake of educating the people in general, you should perform your work.
Jaya. So here we find now a general principle being introduced, and I'm going to go into text 21 as well in order to discuss it. Text 21 is very, very famous. Most of us have heard it many times. Yad yadacharati shreshtas tattad evetaro janaha sayat pramanam kurute lokastad anuvartate. Whatever action a great man performs, common men follow. And whatever standards he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. So this is coming now to the heart of Krishna's argument. Krishna, he's saying, even if you're beyond this platform, you need to set a good example, right? Because if you don't, things are going to go really bad. Now, does this remind anyone of anything that's previously been discussed? Have we previously in the Bhagavad-gītā discussed things going really, really bad in broader society depending on Arjuna's actions? Where have we heard this before? Who can tell me? Oh,
so the golden chain to hell, all the unwanted progeny, and then everything is just totally ruined for everyone. Yeah.
Exactly. So Arjuna, he was making this point. He said, "Oh, if I fight, then society is going to go so terribly, right? If I do my duty, if I do what is right, then everything's going to go awfully, right? Everything's going to go awfully." And now Krishna, so in many ways, even though the section he's describing about why you should still do it, he's still relating to Arjuna's arguments. In fact, I would say, text 17 to 35, in one sense, even though it's described why we should still perform Nishkama Karma Yoga, even if we're beyond that platform, or Arjuna should do that, it also in many ways is addressing that fourth argument, depending how you list out the arguments of, well, everything's going to go terribly if I don't fight. This whole section is saying, well, actually, if you don't fight, things are going to go terribly, not if you do fight. Why? Because whatever great people do, lesser people follow. And we can find this principle, I'm sure we all can see it. I think this is one of the most self-evident ones, right? How much people blindly follow celebrities and everything today. And they're obviously not great people in the absolute sense of the term, but people do perceive them as great. Everything will be followed. And it's not that people will find the essence, even if we take examples of actually great people, like Srila Prabhupada. Tamal Krishna Goswami, he often tells a story that when he was a new devotee, Srila Prabhupada, when he would say yes, he would say, yes, like this, right? We all know the Indian head, the Indian head shake. And so Tamal Krishna Goswami thought, oh, this is the spiritual way of saying yes. So he would instruct people, whenever you say, you should try to master the, nodding in this way, right? Until the first time he went with Srila Prabhupada to India. And then he realized, wait a second, everyone does this here. This isn't some transcendental, mystical way of, agreeing, right? So because of this, this is an example, right? Of course, Srila Prabhupada is a great personality, but maybe it's not the most essential thing in our spiritual lives to all start mastering the Indian nod, right? So this would be one example. Another example I remember is Kamsari Sena Prabhu. I remember he was telling me back when he was a fresh bhakta, right? And he was first coming to the temple, he would see that some devotees, they would be chanting, right? And they would be chanting their rounds and they would be speaking to each other while chanting. And I remember he told me, he said as a young bhakta, he thought, wow, these people, they're so elevated, they can speak to each other while chanting. This must be some higher level of realization of the holy name, right? And of course, I'm sure we can tell that that's maybe, look, I wouldn't say that's a very high level of realization of the holy name for speaking to somebody else while chanting, right? So not to throw shade on those devotees, but this would be an example, right? By setting the wrong example, then everyone will follow because people are not able to really discriminate, right? People don't have that ability to discriminate. And so Krishna, he's saying actually, you must do this because if you're really concerned about society going to hell in a, I forgot what it's called, hell in a something basket, hell in a fruit basket or something is the saying, right? If you're really concerned about that, well, then you actually should fight because then suddenly people will see you. And what will they think? They'll think, oh, Arjuna, the great warrior, even though, right, all of these terrible things had happened, we learned that fleeing, that if you don't want to do your duty, you don't have to do it, right? Again, as we've all discussed in our questions for the first time, it's not saying then the people should do the opposite, right? Because in very many ways, terrorism and violence today is actually the opposite of Arjuna's example, right? Because they're taking up a duty that's not theirs, right? And therefore they're doing it incorrectly, right? All of this, most of the violence today is violence that is being done outside of one's duty, right? There is such a thing, unfortunately, as sanctioned violence. And that is, for example, we can think of the prison system, right? The prison system, even though it's very faulty in the way it's being performed these days, right? It still needs that threat of violence in order to keep some sort of regulation, right? We'll find that area, the whole idea, the presence of a police force is valuable only because there is that implicit violence behind it. And that is sanctioned violence. And in many ways, that is what preserves peace. We can think almost, we can almost feel, I don't want to say spoiled today, but today we can think of this aggressive pacifism, right? Which is the ideal, right? And the Vedas agree with this, right? Be as pacifist as you can be, but we also have to be realistic. The peace that we enjoy today is built on a lot of violence, unfortunately, right? So it's this general principle that unfortunately everything has to be utilized in order to maintain overall absolute peace, right? But this overall absolute peace cannot be maintained if everyone feels they have the right to violence. And therefore, we have this question of you should do your duty and not try to assume somebody else's. Because if Arjuna now said, well, I don't want to do it, then somebody will say, well, if Arjuna was able to switch over to something else, then I can switch over to what he was meant to do. And if anyone else had fought, if some rando had gone in and fought, that would have not been very good, right? So we can see here both, we can see here not only would Arjuna's actions result in people not being defended properly, right? I'm sure even the most ardent pacifist would struggle to say that having an army acting in self-defense, which is practically what this war was, like a war of self-defense, even the most ardent pacifist, I think, would struggle to condemn a self-defense war, right? So not only would we have people not defending, but you'd also have the opposite. You would then have Arjuna setting the example that it's then fine to act in violence when you want to, because Arjuna is showing that duty is malleable, right? So we should not think that Krishna's instructions to fight are instructions for violence, right? They're instructions for this healthy and safe maintenance of societal equanimity and peace. Does that make sense? I always feel the need to stress this point because unless we really get that flow, you know what I mean? It comes off a bit aggressive. Okay, right. So this is the central point here. You're talking about all of the different terrible things that can happen. Well, yeah. Now there's another principle here as well. And this is one that Srila Prabhupada comments on. Where is the Sanskrit? Wait 1 second. Is it here? Yes. Acharati, right? This text is very significant to us Gauriya Vaishnavas. Krishna's Kaviraj Thakur. Yeah, let me get my vanishing pen so you all can see. There we go. Acharati, right? Right here. And what is it in the word for word? It is he does, right? Acharati, right? This is where we get the word acharya from, right? We've all heard the word acharya, right? The great teacher or something. So who is the acharya? The acharya is one who establishes by his example, right? And we're going to come to all of this further fleshed out as we continue the chapter, right? As we continue this section of the chapter. The acharya is somebody who teaches by his example. Lord Chaitanya said that a teacher should behave properly before he begins teaching. So Arjuna, in the role as a leader, he also needs to realize that acting as a leader, the whole world follows him. And this is actually a natural system because he is held up as a teacher, right? And so we find Prabhupada at the end. What does he say? The king or the executive head of the state, the father and the school teacher are all considered to be natural leaders of the innocent people in general. All such leaders have a great responsibility to their dependents. Therefore, they must be conversant with standard books of moral and spiritual codes. So everyone who's leading, everyone who's in a position of authority, they have to accept that related to that authority are several duties. One of this is that they are setting that example, right? So for example, in every election we'll hear, because in all around the world, virtually no one being voted for is a particularly good person, right? So because of this, everyone will always make the argument. They'll say, oh, you know, I'm voting for the person who'll get the job done best, not the person who has the best moral character or something, right? They'll say that I'm voting for my leader, not for my priest, right? But actually, this is an incorrect way of thinking, according to the Vedic system, right? We would say actually that a person should have some moral character because that moral character pours out, right? That moral character relays what a nation would see as embodying them, right? Whether we like it or not, the leader of the nation embodies the nation. And therefore, the leader of the nation should embody good values, which is why Prabhupada says they must be conversant with standard books of moral and spiritual codes, which we don't see very often. I think the last example, you could say, at least in the West of this, I think in the Netherlands, maybe nearly 100 years ago now, voted a prime minister who was a theologian. But that would probably be the last time we had anyone who was really too, at least in the Western world, too conversant with all of these things. Yes, we can have very timely political commentary. My goal as the teacher is to make sure you guys never figure out my political views. But I'm very happy. I'm very fine if you guys want to express yours. I like Srila Prabhupada's general approach to politics, which is everyone's a demon. I very much like that approach, which is the one I generally take anyway. So good luck figuring out who I support, because I support no one. Yeah. So okay. So we find this, right? And that's why Hari Bhakti Vilas actually says that the misbehavior of the citizens in a kingdom, those sinful reactions are put on the king as well, right? Because it is the king's duty to set the good example. And so their misbehavior means he has taught improperly. We can think of the principle, right? There's no such thing as a bad student, only bad teachers. I personally disagree with that sentiment. I do think there are some bad students, but I think the general principle does apply here, right? There's no such thing as bad students, only bad teachers, right? Which is why this responsibility is there. However, just because this does tie into maybe political dimensions, in democracy, it's slightly different because we have empowered the leaders by our votes. The karmic reaction is spread around. So whenever you vote for somebody, you're also taking part of that karmic baggage of whatever their actions are, right? Because now you've chosen this person as law, so you're implicated in their actions. It's not just that they've done a bad job, now you're part of this, right? So it's a little bit more complex in our situations, right? Which is why Prabhupada in general, Prabhupada himself, he in general never really voted. He would always say that people would ask, you know, who are you voting for? What are your, et cetera, et cetera. And Prabhupada said, I do not vote. And in general, my disciples don't. Yes, yes, yes. So Alex, this is a good example. And actually, and please don't take this sentence out of context and blast it everywhere, but bin Laden isn't actually wrong in saying that, but he's wrong then in everything else he does following it, which is coming back to my point, right? You don't just assume that responsibility if it's not yours, right? And it's practically no one's responsibility in this day and age, right? And furthermore, it's not a self-defense war because bin Laden was not basing it on genuine ethical principles, even based on the Quran, right? If you read all of the texts in the Quran that bin Laden was using to justify his actions, if you read them in context, they're all describing self-defense, right? I was surprised when I read through the Quran, all of those scary verses that we always see, you know, Fox News and all quoting, right? When you actually see those in context, they're all saying in self-defense, right? They're saying once, you know, whatever, right? I won't get into the context of Quranic statements, right? But even in the Quran, right, it describes it all in self-defense. So we find bin Laden is actually being condemned by the Gita, right? Which we would hope, right? We would hope that bin Laden is being condemned by the Gita because he is not being conversant with standard books and spiritual codes, right? So because of that, this logic does not apply to bin Laden, right? Because firstly, bin Laden's critique is actually correct, right? Bin Laden also says God exists, right? So it's not that literally everything bin Laden says has to be wrong, but his most horrid actions are definitely wrong and definitely condemned. Again, because he's not conversant with the spiritual books, right? The moral and spiritual books. And secondly, because he's not acting in self-defense to hijack a plane and like destroy the Twin Towers and all sorts of other terrible things, right? If bin Laden's actions were simply defending the area he was in from invasion, you could say that those actions are maybe more morally, there might be more of a moral discussion there. But again, this would be an example of exactly what Krishna is condemning. Krishna is saying, again, Arjuna, by you not acting in this way, you're showing that there's a flexibility in the utilization of violence. And the moment we can be flexible in the utilization of violence, then society really goes bad. Does that make sense? So again, the moment you start saying that, then you do end up with bin Ladens, right? Because they say, but there's wiggle room, right? There's a wiggle room with how this is all applied. Does that make sense, Alex, about the distinction? Because I do think it's a very important distinction to have.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, okay. Let's keep on going then. I'm just gonna minimize this because it's hard for me to see the screen. Okay, and therefore, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, what has he said? Krishnadas Kaviraj Thakur, he often quotes this text, right? That therefore, even in spiritual life, this doesn't just apply in material life, but also in spiritual life, as per the example that I gave from Kansari Sena Prabhu, right? This is also a spiritual thing, and therefore, the great acharyas are those who teach by example. And this is a principle that's going to be picked up later on as we keep on going through these texts. Now, having given the example of Janaka Maharaj, right? We now move on to text 22, and Krishna gives another very cool example. And what is that example? That example is of Krishna himself. Name partasti kartavyam trishu lokeshu kinchana navaktam avdavyam varta eva chakarmani. Maybe we can have Tarun Prabhu, would you like to read out the translation?
Yes, sure. O son of Partha, there is no work prescribed for me within all the three planetary systems, nor am I in want of anything, nor I have a need to obtain anything, and yet I am engaged in prescribed duties.
So now he's saying that even I, Krishna, right? Even I do this, right? Because of its importance, right? Because of the importance of this activity, because of the importance of maintaining this, even I do it, not just Janak Maharaj, right? But even I do this, right? Again, why? Because people do not think of their disqualification, right? People are very eager, right, to think, well, he did it, therefore I can do it. Nobody really tries to distinguish so strongly, am I truly qualified for this, right? This is not the mindset people have. And so because of that, even Krishna does this. And we can see all of the spiritual inappropriate acts, they flow from this, right? They flow, the sahajiyas, right? They flow from this misunderstanding, right? Because what does Krishna say next? He says, Yadi hyaham navarteyam jatu karmanyatandritiha mama vartmanu vartante manushya partha sarvashaha. Right? For if I ever failed to engage in carefully performing prescribed duties, O Partha, certainly all men would follow my path. Now, there's a certain question that pops up in everyone's minds when they read these texts. Who knows what the question is? What is a question that appears when we read this?
Krishna danced with the gopis.
Yes, right? Krishna, not only Krishna, we can find when we read Krishna book, we're not exactly reading the embodiment of all good duties. Krishna, he steals, he lies, he dances with all of the gopis, right? He does all of these things. Oh, well, you know, is Krishna forgotten all of these things, right? Krishna, he's doing the complete opposite of setting this example. Now, there's two aspects that need to be remembered. Firstly, we have to remember that there are different Krishnas. I'm sure maybe some of us have heard of this principle before, right? That there's many Krishnas. Well, there's two main Krishnas that we're concerned with. Who knows who the two Krishnas are? We'll list them up. Oh, somebody's writing in the chat. He's suffering from amnesia. Yes, well, sometimes he does suffer from amnesia. I think we'll touch on that in Nectar of Devotion. Avatar and Avatari, yes, there is somehow that distinction, but that's not specifically the distinction I'm gunning for here.
Is it Shyam Sundar Krishna and Vasudev Krishna, Prabhu?
Yes, yes. So there's Krishna in Vrindavan and Krishna outside. Different ways of expressing it. I like to say there is Vrajanath Krishna. Oh, one second, why is it not? There's Vrajanath Krishna, right? And he is the Krishna who is always in Vrindavan. So some people sometimes ask, Krishna, he does not leave, he says, I will never leave Vrindavan, or Krishna says, I'm never outside Vrindavan, but then he does leave, right? This is the principle. Krishna, he becomes invisible, but the ultimate Krishna, he is actually always in Vrindavan. And then there's Dwarkanath Krishna, who leaves Vrindavan. There's also 3 Srimati Radharanis who correlate to these. No, Alex, it's a little bit different than the hypostases, but that's that's maybe a bit too rasic, the 3 Radharanis. We can cover that in Nectar of Devotion. That's relevant there. So this general principle is good to remember. So Vrajanath Krishna, this is Swayam Bhagavan Krishna, right? This is the fullest form. This is the Krishna who is doing all of these things. And then there's Dwarkanath Krishna. This Krishna, he leaves Vrindavan, he rules in Dwarka, he fights in Kurukshetra. And this is an expansion of that Krishna. So for those of us who are familiar with Krishna book, Devaki and Vasudev, they give birth to Dwarkanath Krishna, right? The Krishna born in the prison, this is Dwarkanath Krishna, right? But Mother Jashoda, she actually gives birth to Vrajanath Krishna. So, so technically, actually, Mother Jashoda does give birth to Krishna. When Mother Jashoda gives birth, she gives birth to twins. But she's so much in intense pain. I'm sure all of the mothers in the group can tell us that you're not exactly, you can't exactly do algebra while you're giving birth. It's a bit of a complex, it's a bit of an intense process, right? So she's in so much pain and so much, so much exhaustion, she doesn't realize that she gives birth to twins, right? So, so then when Nanda Maharaj comes, because what time is it? Oh no, not Nanda Maharaj. When Vasudev comes, what time is it? What time of day is it when Vasudev arrives?
Midnight.
Midnight, right? And is it very easy to see things at midnight? No, so he doesn't see the beautiful dark Krishna who was born. And so when he places Dwarkanath Krishna, he places him on top of Vrajanath Krishna and they merge together, right? And merging together, then they're acting together. And then the moment when Krishna has to leave Vrindavan, Vrajanath Krishna, he disappears and he enters into the hearts of all the devotees. And Dwarkanath Krishna, then he goes back to where he came from, right? So he then leaves. So in this sense, Vrajanath Krishna, he never leaves Vrindavan. And Dwarkanath Krishna, he wasn't born in Vrindavan and he stays there for a bit and then he leaves, right? So we have to remember this. Dwarkanath Krishna, he is, even though he engages in all of these pastimes, there is a distinction of Krishnas in a sense, right? And I just think it's an important principle to remember. So in many ways, this is not Vrajanath Krishna speaking, right? This is Dwarkanath Krishna speaking. We shouldn't make this so strict a principle, but this is him speaking, right? This is the Krishna who is the king. This is the Krishna who is establishing. This is the Krishna who is the Kshatriya, right? Playing the role of the Kshatriya. Whereas Vrajanath Krishna is very much the Vaishya, although he doesn't even live up to Vaishya rules sometimes, in one sense. Of course, it is all pastime. So we have this distinction here. Let's see, what is Alex sent here? What is the photo? No. So those are all Vrajanath Krishna in that photo. So we shouldn't get confused. Alex sent a photo of Krishna dancing with all the individual gopis, but that's all the one same Swayam Bhagavan dancing with all of them. That's not, those are expansions of Krishna, but they're not like Dwarkanath Krishna. Dwarkanath Krishna is slightly not the fullness of Krishna, whereas all of those ones dancing with all the gopis are the full expression of Krishna. Okay, so I've made this distinction because our acharyas do bring out this distinction. We have this, right, distinct personalities, if you will, in Krishna. And it's described, I haven't found the Shastra it's in, but I've heard from some very senior devotees that Krishna, he hides in the hearts of all of the devotees in Vrindavan. And when he leaves, he pops out, right? He thinks, okay, I've hidden here long enough. Let's see what happens. And when he exits, he exits, but then he sees, oh, I want to go to the Jamuna River, right? But when he goes up to the Jamuna, he says, this isn't the Jamuna, this is the Ganga, right? And then he looks at his hands and he says, oh, where is my beautiful Shyam Sundar skin gun? I'm Gaur Sundar now. So they say that this is the way that Krishna stole the hearts of his devotees in order to become Mahaprabhu while he was hiding away. It's a sweet narration. So sometimes we hear that that's how Krishna, he stole the hearts of all his devotees in order to taste that love as Mahaprabhu, was while he was hiding away as while performing his earthly pastimes. Okay, so all of that's a bit of a rasic tangent. So let's come back to the central point. So the idea is Krishna saying, I do all of this to set the right example, right? I do all of these things, even though I don't need to, right? So now Krishna doesn't do all of those. Why does he then break these rules, right? There's a few different reasons why. One is that he's showing, let's get those reasons up. One, he's showing, actually, who can tell me? Prabhupada, he lists one reason in the purports. What is one reason that Prabhupada lists for why Krishna breaks these rules?
He descends to establish religious principles.
Yes, so that's why he follows the rules, right? So he's descending to apply them. But Prabhupada actually mentions why then Krishna sometimes would break those rules.
Oh, my bad, sir.
No, all good, all good. Maybe let's scroll up a bit. In the chat. Yes, in one sense there is that, Alex, and yeah, we can write that, right? That in his Vraj pastimes, he's showing that devotion is higher than all of these rules, right? Okay, there's definitely
isn't it the idea of like, well, whatever the Lord does, we should follow, but we shouldn't try to imitate the Lord?
Yes, very good.
Because the idea is that we all very quick to go Krishna dances with the gopis, but we don't go to the fact that he also lifted Govardhan Hill, and all their many Shiva Bhaktas are very quick to smoke ganja, but they haven't drunk the great ocean of poison which was churned using Mandara mountains. So the idea is a devotee should actually understand what are the prescribed duties one should be following, and shouldn't mindlessly imitate.
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? So in these pastimes, we find they all come across with all of these other things. Krishna, he's drawing out a distinction. I am not a regular person. I can do all of these things. People will say, oh, well, you know, I can dance in the Ras Leela. I can find all of these girls and dance with them. But can you expand and dance with each one of them, with the fullness of yourself with all of them, right? You get what I mean? Oh, I can do all of these things. Can you lift Govardhan Hill? So all of these pastimes, they happen in a way which is stressing the point that Krishna is different, right? Krishna is the Supreme Personality. He is Ishwar, right? He is the Supreme Controller. And because he is the Supreme Controller, he is allowed to do, right? So when he does break these rules, however, there's also another interesting point, right? And this is a point our Acharyas stress. There is a reason why we don't, in every ISKCON center, sit down and recite the Ras Leela and talk about 10th canto pastimes and read Gita Govinda and all of these rasic texts. Not that we hate them, right? Not that we're much the opposite. We love them so much that we don't want to freely share them around. Vrindavan is not a famous place. Vrindavan wouldn't really have been on the map in the time of Krishna, right? Who are his most sacred devotees? They're in a mundane perception, there's some random cowherds and cowgirls, right? They're quote unquote nobodies, right? The greatest personalities in existence are quote unquote nobodies, right? These things are hidden away, right? So there's also this other aspect, right? And this is why we don't openly go around talking about the Ras Leela and all, not because it's secret knowledge. Everyone has a rough idea that it happens, right? And Prabhupada even includes it in Krishna book. This isn't some culty secret knowledge, right? But we don't discuss it all the time because first, let us understand the teachings. Let us understand the philosophy. Let us understand the distinction between Krishna and regular people. And then let us hear those things, right? And then let us fully situate that properly in the philosophy. Let us first follow and then not imitate when we understand what is to be followed and what is not, right? And that's why when we find Mahaprabhu, in every way, we can follow everything he does, right? Because Mahaprabhu now is Krishna playing the role of the devotee. The devotee we can, in one sense, imitate in every way, right? And that's why Mahaprabhu Leela, Gaur Leela is very interesting, right? Mahaprabhu's pastimes both show us how we should act and also the ultimate goal of how to act. They're both the lowest and the highest in that sense, right? The most accessible and the highest, right? Now we might say, oh, but Mahaprabhu, he's listening to all of these Rasic books, right? But how is he listening to them? A, he's listening to them only with very senior and advanced devotees. And secondly, he's only doing it because he's on the highest platform, right? So in order to truly imitate, right, because we first need to get on that platform before engaging fully in those things, right? But Mahaprabhu, he is fully, Gauranga Mahaprabhu Chaitanya, right? He is fully manifesting Chaitanya Leela. So in order to show this distinction, we find that Krishna does still do these things, right? Because he is the Supreme Lord. He is above all of these things. And so too are the pure devotees. But again, we should not imitate, but rather follow. Or rather, with the pure devotee, we can imitate fully, but we should see what steps did they take before doing these maybe transgressional things, right? So with Krishna, there's always the follow, don't imitate, because we are not aiming, we never become Krishna, right? So there's a fair bit of distance, but still the general principle is there for the broader public that Krishna wants to show the example of morality, which is why, again, especially for general preaching, for general things, we should talk about Krishna really in moral terms, right? Because this is the openness. Krishna's more intimate pastimes shouldn't be plastered around everywhere because that's his private life, so to speak, right? You don't want the principles of your privacy broadcasted everywhere. There's one pastime of one devotee, and he was in South India, and he accidentally was invited. Well, he didn't realize, but he was going to an event run by the Ramakrishna Mission, right? And so he went there, right? He hadn't realized that it was a Mayavadi event. And turning up there, he went and he heard them all start saying Mayavad. And his response was, he started talking about how Shiva once wanted to enter into the Ras Leela, but then as he entered into it, we might have heard this past time, I won't recite the whole thing, he's kicked out of it. And so this is his way of showing, oh, you know, impersonalism isn't the way to go, right? He was trying to show that. And when he told that to his mentor chastised him heavily, right? He said, you don't turn up to an event and start talking about the Ras Leela, especially if they're impersonalists, right? You turn up and you tell them Bhagavad-gītā, right? You tell them, you know, there is a difference between the soul and the Supreme Personality. You don't start exploding into the Ras Leela, right? So this general principle is there, right? Krishna here, he's showing why we don't generally delve, you know, our opening line isn't on book distribution, Haribol, Krishna dances in the middle of the night with all of the gopis, right? Our opening line is Haribol, you're not this body, right? And then much, much later on, we can maybe get to those details. Does that make sense? So we can find here, this is the principle why we maybe are not uncomfortable, but maybe we want to not discuss so much these intimate details, right? And Mahaprabhu has set the example very well. Before Mahaprabhu heard all of these rasic pastimes, he heard the pastimes of Prahlad Maharaj and Dhruv Maharaj like 200 times from Gadadhar Pandit, who is none other than Srimati Radharani, right? So Srimati Radharani is speaking to Mahaprabhu 200 times the pastimes of Dhruv Maharaj and Prahlad Maharaj. Maybe we can understand, if we wish to imitate Mahaprabhu, first let us hear these things, right? First, let us go through the process he did in order to hear these high things, which is possible for us. If we wish to imitate Krishna, first let us lift Govardhan Hill, which we will never be able to do. So then we can set that aside altogether. Does that make sense? So there's some nuance. But Krishna, he's saying in general, he does follow these principles in order to set an appropriate example so that things don't go crazy, right? So those, I would say, are the general principles. Okay. So now let's keep going. Yes, so again, for if I ever fail to engage in carefully performing prescribed duties, O Partha, certainly all men would follow my path. If I did not perform prescribed duties, all these worlds would be put into ruination. I would be the cause of creating unwanted population, and I would thereby destroy the peace of all living beings. And here we have Sankarasya. If it wasn't obvious before that Krishna is directly addressing Arjuna's problem with the unwanted progeny, right? If it wasn't obvious before, it's made very explicit here. He is directly saying unwanted progeny will be a direct result of my misbehavior, and it also will be a result of your misbehavior. Why is he coming back to unwanted progeny? Because this was how Arjuna presented the argument, right? So he's clearly referencing back to that. Now, I remember one devotee I was talking to, he made a very good point. Why is the blame being put on women, right? Why are you blaming women in the first chapter, right? And so here we can see it's not actually that women are being blamed, because the emphasis is being placed actually on the misbehavior of men, right? So actually it's men who are fully being blamed. Actually, we can take this as the logic of the Gita. We can say that that a lot of the terrible situations women are in, especially in modern society, in many ways can be blamed on the men, because what is Krishna saying here, right? If you misbehave, then this unfortunate position will arise with women. So it's not that he's putting the blame on women, he's actually very much putting the blame on men first, right? Just to come to that point, because I think it's a very important distinction to be made. Okay, then let's keep going. Now, when we come to text 25, and we won't be able to discuss this fully, we'll have to conclude this part next week. Again, the activity took a little longer than I expected in the first half, but I'm happy it did, right? Because we're back in the flow of things. As we come to text 25, we will now start hearing about a distinction between two types of people. We will hear about the relationship between the person who is the detached worker and the person who is the attached worker, right? So there is the detached worker versus the attached worker. Why is this brought up? Even though this is categorized as the description of act in order to set the right example, in many ways it's talking about, well, what is the relationship between these two people, right? What is the relationship between the attached person, right, who is not even qualified to do Nishkama Karma Yoga, and what is the relationship between the person who's very much qualified and who has very much become qualified to this? 25 to 29 are very much discussing this, right? What is the relationship between these two people, right? And this ties into the overall point, because he's saying, what is the responsibility? How then? Okay, I'm meant to set the example. How am I meant to set that example? How am I meant to relate to people who are not yet on that level? How am I meant to do this? This is the question that may arise, right? Does this make sense? So Arjuna's question may arise. Okay, so you're saying set the example, right? But how do I actually set the example appropriately, right? How do I do so in a way that doesn't result in more issues, right? And we will discuss as we go through the issues that are there. So we will probably touch on that next week. I think we've come to an end. I won't dive deeper into that. So that's text 25 to 29. That's the dichotomy. For your homework, please read texts 25 to 29 and try and identify, right, the detached worker and the attached worker, and get a list of the ways they're meant to interact. And then I'll quickly run over them next week. Now, I just want to make some final points before moving onto concluding the lesson, because they have to do with your question. I asked at the beginning how everyone's going, because I wasn't sure how clear it is, but there's just some points I want to make about the texts we've discussed regarding your answering the question. Again, it's technically due tomorrow, but I'm pretty comfortable if you get it in a few days late. Again, I feel like I know most of you outside of this class, and there's been some complication or another for most of you. So yeah, and I feel like for everyone there has been, just with this Omicron stuff going on. But don't make it a month late, just a few days late if it is. But I would still, it's probably better to get it off your chest to hand it in tomorrow. So the principle is there, right? I'm just going to tie this in explicitly. We find that yes, the devotee is fully beyond this level, right? Because even though there are questions of qualification, and we will discuss that in text 25 to 29, I was hoping to reach it, there's the principle of somebody who's not so qualified should not be disturbed in their varnashram, right? Somebody who's not so qualified should not be disturbed, right? However, this is referring to becoming pure enough for jnana, right? Bhakti, somebody can join that at any point. Even though it's at the top of the yoga ladder, it's unique because it also gives the way to jump up the yoga ladder, right? Bhakti is at the top of the yoga ladder, but it's also accessible at any moment, right? So why then should one still engage in, should we say, some appropriation of varnashram, some attempt at varnashram? Krishna here is explaining it. Varnashram is not useless to the person who is above varnashram, right? Because of course, varnashram is referring to society appropriately run, society appropriately being engaged in, right? So varnashram is not useless because varnashram still sets a good example, right, for how people should behave. It is not that the devotee in being beyond, right? It is not that the devotee being beyond all of these rules and regulations can break all of them, right? Because the devotee, by doing that, is setting a bad example and therefore causing chaos. If even Krishna, right, who these rules and regulations don't even apply to at any point, right? If even he follows them to set a good example, that is the role they have. That is the relevance they can have to the devotee. The devotee is fully beyond and above them. We've already discussed this, right? What is the list of the relationship to the person who is transcending all of these things? He has no taste for things outside him, right? So he doesn't get any joy out of varnashram. He gets no benefit from doing it. He has no piety, so why would he want to grow in it? He's already destroyed all of his piety through the power of transcendental devotional service. He has no dependence on any of the other living beings, so he has no reason to please them through these activities, and he has no obligation to perform them. The devotee has a very distant relationship. The devotee has a very distant relationship to varnashram, right? The devotee has a very distant one, and yet still, nevertheless, Krishna is giving some importance to it. Why? Because we don't want society to go terribly. You don't want people to see the example of spiritual persons and then think, oh, well, then this is fine, right? Because it really, it really can go south the moment that starts happening, right? Once people feel like they have religious justification, they really feel like they have ultimate justification, and that shouldn't be given, right? Furthermore, not everyone is on that level. And so for people who aren't on that level, they do need these things, and therefore it is appropriate for the devotee to give them. The devotee will still give them, though, in a way that allows them to be purified. Because what is Krishna's whole point, right? Is that this varnashram, right? Because again, going back to the earlier point, if one is not on that level, this still acts in a purificatory way. So the promotion of varnashram is there, not because varnashram needs to be done by the devotee. Again, we have the whole list, right? Varnashram does not need to be done by the devotee at all, right? Traditionally, before the time of Bhakti-śāstrī Saraswati Thakur, you wouldn't take sannyas, you would take Babaji Vesh, right? And we make a big deal of sorry, I'm going a tiny bit over time. Feel free to leave. Right now, I'm just clarifying this central point, and then I'll answer Mrugank Prabhu's question. These days, we make a big deal, oh, second initiation, Brahmin initiation, right? But actually, traditionally, when one became a Babaji, they would take their Brahmin's thread off and chuck it out, right? Because they were beyond that platform, right? They were beyond any concern of society. Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Prabhupada, he introduced sannyas cloth in order to assist preaching, but also in order to counteract the misconception of people who were rushed into this, right? Again, we're hearing a condemnation. Krishna, he starts off, know what level you're at and act in that level, right? Many people were then saying, oh, I'm fully transcendental, and then mithyachara, right? They were the hypocrites, right? Inappropriately engaging these things. So Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he introduces sannyas in order to send this message, right? That actually a renunciate should be engaged in the world. They should be preaching, not just doing meditation, although they should be doing that as well, right? Furthermore, he was doing that as a rejection of the abuses that were there. That's not to say that he rejected Babaji Vesh. There's sometimes people hear this and they say, Babajis are all evil, I hate them all, right? Which is incredibly inappropriate, because Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, he described many Babajis, not his disciples, right? Other Babajis at the time, he described them as devotees so elevated that his disciples will not be able to understand the profundity of their behavior, right? That's no small praise, right? Furthermore, he actually gave Babaji initiation to some of his disciples. Pran Krishna Das Babaji, no, not Pran Krishna, that's a different Babaji. Krishna Das, Kinchana Krishna Das Babaji Maharaj, who Srila Prabhupada also held very, very highly, was a Babaji disciple of Srila Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, right? So Babaji Vesh is still relevant. Anyways, coming back to the central point, the devotee is above all of these things when they're on that high platform, right? So the devotee does transcend all of these things. However, again, why did Srila Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada introduce sannyas then? In order to make relevant example of proper behavior in society, right? Because what else is preaching, right? So in order not only to preach to spread Krishna consciousness, but also in order to establish a society which is conducive to Krishna consciousness, he has presented this, a society which is able to purify. So what is Varnashram? Varnashram is almost purely a preaching thing, but preaching is very important to the devotees. Does this make sense? And that's what Prabhupada would say. Again, devotees will sometimes will inappropriately make a big deal about Varnashram, right? Because Prabhupada did make a big deal about Varnashram, but he would say things like, when society crumbles, then they will all flock to our farms, right? Statements like this. He saw it as a preaching opportunity, because ultimately the devotee does not need to perform Varnashram on that highest level. However, again, it is very valuable to purification and for preaching, and also in order to create an environment that is conducive to one's devotional service. I won't discuss this more because we'll discuss this more next week, but I hope that should be enough for you guys to really answer your questions. If anyone has any questions regarding the assignment questions, please ask those. If not, I will get to Mrugank Prabhu's question and then any other questions. But are there any ones related to the assignment?
Is question 5 also 600 words?
Yeah. So same thing. Every single open book is 600 words, no more than 700, please. And the same things, please have some citations in there. Yeah. And I won't be as lax as I'm going to be on late submissions for all of the later ones. So that was just for this first round, just because, yeah, I understand it's a bit stressful. Any other questions regarding the assignment? Okay, so Mrugank Prabhu asked the question. I'll stop the screen share. Mrugank Prabhu asked the question, can this section of doing your duty be used to justify devotees following the law of the state in today's world? So Prabhupada himself, he actually did say this. I forgot who it was, maybe better not to name them. They were asking if they could have polygamous wives, because in Vedic times they had polygamous wives when devotee wrote to Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada's response was, we shouldn't agitate the legal standards of, unless they're suppressing Krishna consciousness, it's better not to agitate the governments like that, right? Of course, Prabhupada also would say then, why do you want more than one wives, right? That would also be the response in other situations. But we find in one instance, right, Prabhupada did appeal to that. So I think from there we can see that's there. Because again, like, what's the point of breaking? Again, we have to think, right? What is the best for the establishment of Krishna consciousness? What is the best to show the beauty of Krishna in the world? Is it really necessary to break laws, right? Is one important aspect. Insofar though, as I think you can also talk about general political engagement, which I think is an important thing to discuss. I don't think there's a one-to-one correlation, right? I don't think we can just take the principles of karma yoga and say, I'm going to do karma yoga based on secular law, because secular law is based on very different presuppositions and all. It doesn't really equate, right? Today's law is based on rights. I hope Śrikānta Sena Prabhu doesn't correct me in my understanding of today's law, but in my understanding, it's generally based on principles of rights and protecting one's ability to free expression of themselves, right? Vaguely that, please correct me if I'm very, very wrong, but if that's a general rough understanding, right? It's there to provide cohesive freedom, right?
That's the principle, but the application has gone past.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. We're very much past that, but the general principle is it's there to facilitate that very enlightenment, free, let us all be as free as we can be without hurting each other's freedom, right? That is not the mindset of Varnashram or religious law. Religious law is not about rights, it's about duties. It's less what can I do, and it's more what should I do, right? And in that way, rights are preserved. If everyone does what they should do, everyone actually still has that freedom, and I would argue more so, because it's less lazy in that sense, right? If a ruler is told it is your duty to provide for the needs of all of your citizens, then I think you'd have a much more effective welfare state than the idea we have now, right? Where it's sort of like we should give people the freedom in order to basically survive, right? That's the idea we have now. And then maybe welfare isn't driven by the best of reasons, right? So you can have like that. So because of that, even on an ideological level, the laws don't equate, also ignoring the fact that they don't come from a spiritual source, right? So I don't think we can say, you know, let me just do my purpose in society, right, according to legal laws, and this is my nishkama karma yoga. There's that. However, it also is true that varnashram is very hard to implement in today's society. And again, we don't necessarily need to re-implement it because we're practicing devotional service, right? Once a disciple once asked Srila Prabhupada, what is the role of the Vaishnava in varnashram? And Srila Prabhupada said, oh, why is he falling down? Why is he falling down and playing a role in varnashram, right? So we can think of this as, so we don't really need to worry about the reinstatement of it. However, in terms of generally applying this principle, I think, and this is my personal take. Now here, we're going into totally my personal take, but you can apply it to general principles, which we find in the sort of varnashram injunctions, right? Which how do I put it? I think Srila Prabhupada was pretty clear that devotees shouldn't be politically engaged, especially in the way politics works today, which is incredibly tribal, right? Tribal politics especially is very unhealthy to spiritual life, right? But I think in general, supporting principles in society maybe could be seen as a fulfillment of this. Campaigning for a political party is maybe not the most conducive. That's sort of maybe going backwards, right? But potentially, even though it's not, how do I put it? Just because something isn't bhakti doesn't mean it can't be encouraged. And that's what we're discussing later on, right? For all different levels. For example, I look at the animal rights movement, right? The animal rights movement is a movement that devotees should not look at and say, we should treat that, I think, in the way that varnashram is treated in the Gita, right? We should look at it and say, this is a positive step in terms of the consciousness of the welfare of people, in terms of serving others. And if you can try and instruct somebody to do it in a detached way, that's maybe a practical application of this, right? Because it's a principle that really lines up with the baseline essence of varnashram value, right? Does that make sense, right? So I think in that way, we can see it realized in today's society when we can see the general values that are correlated. But I think there's a risk to fall into mundane political mindsets, right? And I don't think it's necessarily for devotees to meditate on a lot, right? I think it very much does qualify to karma yoga, right? Even though it isn't strictly that. I don't want to say that animal activism is karma yoga, but I'm saying that it's maybe the closest thing we can find in modern day society, right? Other things as well, right? Arguing against discrimination against people for certain equality, right? Against many of the sinful things, right? The environmental movement. And of course, then bit by bit, you can encourage that. I mean, look at Bhakti Lounge in New Zealand, right? All of the preaching is done by, hey, look, you know, we're very relevant to environmental issues, to animal rights, all of these things which people find valuable. So it's not discouraging it, but it's encouraging in a way, hey, maybe you can do this in a way where you're detached from the fruits of your work. And then slowly it's about preaching in that way, which, as we'll see, Krishna says is actually a valuable, important thing to do. So all just to come full circle, personally, I don't think applying these principles to laws in today's society is particularly valuable, just because the idea of law in today's society is not really lining up to religious codes. I genuinely think a lot of the more proactive programs of what is my duty to the world, what is my duty to other people, which aren't really expressed in the legal dimension, unfortunately, so much anymore, right? I think those are probably where we can find a stronger corollary to varnashram principles, even if we won't find them at all in modern society, because we are in Kali Yuga, and we can't find a lot that is good here, besides, of course, the Sankirtan mission, which is the best thing ever. Does that make sense? I feel like I talked a while on that.
No, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, but definitely not, I think, as a justification of political tribalism. I remember when I was in Mayapur, I still remember I was there, and again, I'm going to mention now parties. I hope none of you will be able to figure out who I think is better, because that's irregardless of the story. I take a strong position of neutrality. But I still remember I was there in the class, and one senior Prabhupada disciple was speaking, and he spoke something nice about the governor of Bengal at the time, right? But the moment he said that, right, he wasn't saying anything about her policies or something. He just said something she did nice that lines up with Vedic values, right? Which everyone does, even to some degree, right? And we can appreciate that wherever it is, right? And again, I'm not endorsing her, right? But the moment he said that, you could see everyone who didn't vote for her and everyone who did vote for her, right? You could see everyone everyone who voted for her was smiling and nodding, and everyone who wasn't, they were so tense. Like, he could have gone up there and said Krishna is not God, and he would have got a less severe reaction on people's faces than he did for saying there's one good quality in this one leader. He wasn't endorsing her either. He just said he very much liked that she did this, right? And yet, oh my gosh, you could see devotees, we should be unified in our appreciation of Krishna consciousness and the philosophy first, and everything else is secondary, right? And if everything else introduced divisions, then we're falling into the mindset of Mamakaha, right? Because that's what I saw. I saw the Battle of Kurukshetra right there in that Srimad Bhagavatam class, right? You could see the two sides getting ready for the armies, right? So I think that's I think originally there was maybe a fanaticism in not engaging with the world. And I think these days, sometimes devotees are running the risk of a fanaticism in engagement with the world. Both are not good, right? Yeah, so I think that's just another aspect of engaging with the world. I think, yeah. We should appreciate maybe sentiments that line up with it, but I think strict political adherence. I mean, it's in fact literally impossible for most of us, because Prabhupada said democracy is a faulty process altogether, right? So we can't fully strongly endorse it anyways. Do we all know what Prabhupada would call democracy? He would call it demon crazy, exactly, which is a very, you'd say democracy is demon crazy, right? This Prabhupada made this point, right? What is the best form of political engagement, right? Prabhupada says this, he said this in one of his Bhagavatam purports. People are talking about we should vote for this candidate, we should vote for that candidate. But actually the best way to promote societal change is by spreading Krishna consciousness, right? Because by spreading Krishna consciousness, we'll actually create people who are qualified to lead. We will create people who are qualified to vote in the right ways. Right now, the more and more we promote one party over the other, we're just promoting people who are not able to make the right decisions to make all of the wrong decisions, right? So the best way of ensuring that we have meaningful change is by preaching Krishna consciousness, right? Is by, enlightening the world into the proper way of behavior. This is the best political engagement, right? So as Śrikānta Sena Prabhu said, Harinama, Harinama, Harinama eva kevalam, right? This is the best political engagement, right? But again, it is not then just because Krishna consciousness is the best way, doesn't necessarily mean that we see somebody who's maybe not fully at that level and then, go up to them and say, oh, you're fighting for animal rights. You're in Maya, you're in the thickened forest of illusion, right? Instead, we should encourage what is good in that, and then say, maybe cultivate this in Krishna service. Okay, yeah, I've given a very long answer to that, but I think it's an important principle, especially when people try to translate this into their day-to-day existence, because I don't see these as relating to a lot of political activity in the sense that we think of, right? Otherwise we become, sorry, I'm talking again, please feel free to leave during my rant, but otherwise we'll become like, in America, we can see the negative effect of this. In America, the Christian evangelical church strongly aligned themselves with one political party. And because of that, we see them forgiving and excusing a lot of really terrible behavior done by this political party, because they'd sort of lost the essence that we're there to encourage and promote what is good done by the party, but not the party itself, right? And so much the case that now we find that many people leave Christianity in America because they think, oh, I don't agree with this political party, therefore I can't be a Christian, right? And we never want that to happen to Krishna consciousness. We don't want to create any, what happened with the devotees in Bulgaria? That's so sad to hear, right? We don't want that division to be created, right? We don't want that idea to be there if you don't think this way or that way politically, therefore you are not a devotee, right? So we don't want that sort of division to be there. And we also don't want it to get in the way of our preaching, right? I wanted that that everyone from the whole political spectrum can think that chanting Hare Krishna is for them because it's true. Yeah, that's so sad it happened in Bulgaria. It's very sad to see anything like that happen. But yeah, I think that's the importance of Bhakti-śāstrī, right? That's the importance of studying. Kamal Krishna Goswami, he would say the future of our movement will come from study, not from preaching. So yeah, okay. If there's any other questions, don't worry, I won't give a 20-minute response like I did for that one. Otherwise, good luck with your assignment questions. I look forward to having them come in. I'm going to get back to you with the marks in a bit because I do want to give you guys a fair bit of annotation for your first set, just so you get some solid feedback. Yeah, I look forward to it. Have a good week, and yeah, we will finish chapter 3 next week, and then we'll shoot. Yeah.
Sorry, Prabhu. In relation to the assessment, I just wanted to ask. So the verses that we have gone through, if there are any other verses that could be relevant to the question, is it okay to mention them in the assessment?
Yeah, anything from chapter 2 to 3.
Yeah,
even chapter 1. Chapters 1 to 3, anything is relevant. Anything that you can find. Technically you could do anywhere, but I would prefer chapters 1 to 3 just to show it's the content we've really studied in depth.
Yeah.
Really, yeah. Yeah, really, even technically you could even do it just from chapter 2, but I think chapters 1 to 3 just to sort of chapters 2 to 3 at least just to show off, if that makes sense, right? Just to show you've really grasped chapter 3 as well.
No worries. Thank you.
No problem.
Should we finish reading up all of chapter 3 by next Sunday?
Oh yeah. I'm pretty sure I said that. I mean, not calling you out here, Alex, but I'm pretty sure I said that as the homo class here, didn't I? Like you've all finished chapter 3, right?
Yeah, I've been procrastinating myself. I just wanted to reconfirm.
Yeah. But like, I'm not saying this to call you out, Alex. I'm just saying this to call myself out. Sometimes I forget what readings I said. I did tell everyone to finish chapter 3, didn't I?
Yeah, you did. I just wanted to reconfirm because I forgot it's been so long.
No, that's perfectly fine.
I thought it might be like we might need to read up to chapter 4 or something.
No. Chapter 3. Fine. Have chapter 3 done, and then for those of you who finished chapter 3, because I always like you guys to read like 1 week or 2 weeks ahead, so it's, you know what I mean. You can see the path ahead of us. For those of you who have finished chapter 3, please read the first 10 shlokas of chapter 4 with purports, breaking it down into sections and all. And I'll send that into the WhatsApp group. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, well, thank you all for joining. Sorry we didn't get through all the content, but as I said, I think it was good to revise the beginning part. Good luck with your assessments and have a good week. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, thank you.
Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.